Hello and welcome to Pictorial Planet. My name's John Finch. Today we're continuing our journey through the darkroom and the printing process. And today we're going to be looking at specifically testing our safelights. Now, safelights are essential in the darkroom. It's the only way we can work. We can't obviously have the lights on. We have to cut down to safelight when we're using our photographic paper. But how do we know whether our safelights are safe? Are they fogging the paper or not? Fogging of the paper from safelights really affects the highlights and can ruin a beautiful picture. So we need to test our safelights when we set our darkroom up. Now, once we've done this, we don't have to do it again. So let's get on and find out what we have to do to test our safelights thoroughly. There are two places in my darkroom where I handle paper, and that's at the enlarger itself and at the developing tray when I'm actually developing the print itself, which is on my wet side behind me. So it's in these two areas that I'm going to test the paper underneath the safelights. I've set the safelights up in the darkroom. I'm going to do the test and make sure that my safelights are not fogging my paper if I have it out over an extended period of time. Let's turn the lights on because there's one thing I need to explain before we start our test, and that's how the paper works. VC paper responds specifically to blue and green light. It's more responsive to blue. So if I was to draw a curve of color response for VC paper, it would look something like this. And that would be the response to these two colors. Now, as you can see, there's no response to yellow or red. And in fact, we have filters, the OC filter, which is yellow, and we have the 1A filter, which is red. And these are two darkroom safelight filters. So theoretically, if we have one of these filters over our light in the darkroom, it shouldn't affect the VC paper at all. And by and large, that's true, except there's a problem. As your filter ages, it starts to emit more light into the other frequencies. The filter gets old and it's not as efficient anymore. So beware of buying second-hand safelights. They could be starting to affect the VC paper. Another problem might be that the filter doesn't fit very well over the light bulb, and so some of the light is escaping into these frequencies. And by doing that, we are going to fog our paper. The question is, how do we tell if we're fogging our paper? Well, there's a test to do and it's fairly comprehensive, and we'll look now at how to do that test. When our paper is exposed to light, it would be really nice if it had a direct relationship. The amount of exposure directly relates to the amount of density. But in fact, this isn't true. It doesn't happen like this. What happens is it takes a certain amount of exposure to start the reaction, to start the density to build up on the paper. So there's a sort of drag or an inertia of the exposure. If I show you here on the graph, it looks something like this. And this part here is where you're giving it exposure, but there's just no density build-up yet. At one point or another, there is density starting to form. And from that point onwards, the graph then goes up at a nice angle. This is where the paper is most responsive to the amount of exposure, to the amount of density. But then it levels off at the top like this. This is called the toe, and this is called the shoulder. So as you can see, it takes a certain amount of exposure before any density starts to appear on the paper. At that moment, we've got observable density. It builds up, and then up here, the density levels off and levels off like this slowly, and this is the shoulder, and this is where in our shadows we have very little change in the shadows until we hit black. Now, the problem is, as we're printing, the eye can see the light parts of the picture very well. Your eye is very sensitive to changes in the lightest part of the picture. Your eye is least sensitive to the areas here in the shadows. What that means in practice is that any fogging at all is most noticeable in your highlights. And these are usually the parts of your photograph that you want to be really beautifully toned. Skies, clouds, really light, white dresses at a wedding, things like this, where the light tonal response is very important to the success of the image. So fogging is your enemy when it comes to these light parts of your photograph. This also leads me to something else. When we're testing our Safelights, we need to make sure that we have the exposure already on the paper to put it in this area here, because this is the area we're going to be testing. So any of our fogging from Safelights will be most noticeable in this area. We don't want to be testing down here because nothing's going to be happening. This is where the inertia is before any density forms. So the first thing we have to do when we're testing Safelights is to deliberately fog the paper and put it into this area here. And I'm going to call this area the sky area. And the reason I'm going to call it that is because as we fog our paper, we want just enough deliberate fogging to be the sort of tone that we would have in the sky of our photograph. That means that when we test our Safelights, we will notice it the most, how it's affecting our image. So first of all, let's fog our paper. Now there are different ways to flash your paper, and I use this thing by RH Designs called a paper flasher. And this is designed specifically to flash the paper and is very accurate and very easy to use. It has a small light here which you can switch on like so, and I place this light on the ceiling beside the enlarger, and I can really control the amount of flashing that I could get with this device, so it's very useful. However, if you don't have one of these, a good way to do it would be to use your enlarger, rack it up right to the very top, close down the lens as small as it will go, add density if you've got a variable density on your enlarger, and then work out how much flashing you need, how many seconds you need using a test strip to get that sky tone. Now I've got an example here, I'll just fetch it. And here's my example. This was flashed at 15-second intervals using my paper flasher. And so this was 15, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and the next one, 60 seconds. That's the kind of sky tone that I'm after. I'll just bring it closer to the camera. That's how I see my skies in most of my photographs, with the clouds on that. So that's the kind of area you want to be. This isn't too bad. This is a little darker, but it's not too bad. You could use that as well. So 60 or 75 seconds in my case. You should do your own test strip to work out where you get these light but definitive tones in the image. Once I have this, and by the way, I didn't have any negative in the enlarger. This was just straight light, straight coming down from the enlarger. So now I know how to pre-flash my paper to make sure I have the right amount of tone to take the paper off that toe and get it onto that nice straight line that I showed you where it's most reactive. So the next thing to do is to do our actual Safelight test, and to do that I actually draw on a piece of paper. Let me show you. The first thing to do is to move your Safelights as far away as possible from the baseboard of your enlarger. In fact, I switched them all off except one, and I had that as far away as I could in my darkroom. It was very dim indeed, and the reason for this is because while you're drawing out your paper, you don't want it to be affected by your normal Safelights. So in a very dim darkroom, I then got out a sheet of paper and I drew these lines and numbers on it. Along the top, I've got 0 through 8, and then down the side, I've got 2 through 12. You can go higher if you want, but I think that that's about right for me. Now you'll notice that the main part in the middle is open. I haven't drawn on that, but I've drawn these extended lines on the left-hand side, and that's because when I put my board and cover that, I want to be able to just see where the lines are so that I can easily place my piece of paper that covers it over these lines here. If I can find that piece of paper like this, then I can cover these and I know where the lines are to cover it up. It just makes for a neater job and makes it much easier later to see where these are. Now at this point, after drawing it out in very dim light indeed, I could barely see, I then put this paper back into the box and I brought my Safelights back to their normal positions and switched them all on. So now I've got my clock ready and I'm going to do the timing. So get out your piece of paper, cover up the 0 one here with a piece of black card, and then start the clock. You're in Safelights only. You wait the number of minutes it says here on this side. And this side here, the right side with the most numbers written on it, is the ones you're going to cover up whilst on the baseboard of your enlarger. So when we get to 2 minutes, I will then cover up down to the 2. When we get to 3 minutes, I'll cover up to the 3, 4 minutes, and so on, 6, 8, 10, and 12 minutes. I just cover them up just under my normal Safelights. It's important that you don't switch anything on. You then move this whole thing to beside your developing tray. So let me move it now and show you that. So having moved the paper next to my developing tray, I now continue the test, still under Safelight conditions. I start the timer immediately and I wait 2 minutes. And when 2 minutes is up, I then cover up that first part. We're moving left to right now. So these top numbers are the number of minutes beside the developing tray. And I think you can work out what's happening here. These long numbers are where I'm using the paper by the enlarger, doing different things with it while I'm at the enlarger, setting it up, cropping, things like that. And then this top number here is as I'm developing the paper in the developing dish. It's still getting some Safelight on it, so I need to know how that affects it as well. So after 4 minutes, I move my paper along, then I wait a further 2 minutes, and then I wait another 2 minutes till it's been 8 minutes under the Safelight next to the developing tray. Immediately turn it over and develop it. I develop it upside down to minimize any further effect from the Safelights, because after all, it does take a couple of minutes to develop in the tray. And when you finish doing that, you'll get a result that looks something like this. Now, I have to be honest with you, I had to fake this because I couldn't get any reaction to my Safelights in the darkroom. So that's a good thing. That means my Safelights are not fogging my paper at all. Even after 12 and 8, 20 minutes. This bottom corner is 20 minutes of Safelight. And this fake one is showing that it's been fogged. But in reality, when I tested it, I couldn't get any effect on the paper at all. So I'm very pleased about that. But let's just look at this carefully and just understand what it's showing us. So I think you can see, if I just move the camera slightly, I think you can see that as we go down, 2 minutes, 3, 4, 6, 8, they're all clear. There's no fogging up to 8 minutes, but at 10 minutes, you can see we're starting to get some fogging. So I know that I can use the paper in front of the enlarger for up to 8 minutes without any fogging. So that's good. From left to right, as I continue, I process the paper through the developer. You can see that it starts to affect here at 6 minutes. So I can develop for 4 minutes, but if I'm pushing to 6 minutes in the developer, then it's starting to, the Safelight is starting to fog. Now don't mix this up with what we looked at last week, which was chemical fogging, which of course can also affect all of this too. So we're becoming aware of the limitations of our paper in our darkroom by doing these tests. Now this point here is a special point. That's the point where both the work in front of the enlarger and the work in the developer meets and the effect starts hitting home. So at that point, that is where, I'm put a circle here, that is the limit of what I can do. I can have 8 minutes in the enlarger and 4 minutes in front of the developer, or in the developing tray I should say, until I start to fog the paper with the Safelights. So this is a very interesting thing to know about your darkroom, and it's pretty crucial that you know this information. Ultimately, you need to position your Safelights so that they don't create any of this at all, and that all you've got is this fogged paper, that initial fogging, remember, just to give it a bit of sky color. It's grey, it's not white, to get it off that toe into a reactive place on the paper curve. So I hope that's helpful. I think this is an essential test you need to do. I hope I've explained it in a straightforward way. Please just make a comment below if there's something you don't understand about how this system works, and I'll try to answer it. So I hope that's useful for you to know. I want you all to go out in your darkrooms and do this tomorrow. You need to test to make sure your Safelights are good and you're not ruining your highlights in your prints. Give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel to get more information like this. A special thanks to my patrons who bring you this channel every single week. Thanks guys, really appreciate it. So please watch next week for another installment in Pictorial Planet.